The wind howled across the dry ground, as the alien village sat in silence with hollow eyes and empty hands. Their food had run out days ago. And even the strong could barely walk. Now the children no longer cried, they were too weak. The sky was a faded gray and the earth looked like cracked skin, broken and dry. A small figure walked alone from the hills toward the center of the village. His clothes were torn, and his face was smudged with dust. He was a human boy, no more than 14. His name was Kai, and he had fallen from the sky, or so the villagers believed. They had found him beside the broken wreck of a small escape pod. His body had cuts and burns, but his eyes were bright, and his spirit unbroken. They had given him shelter, though. They had little to offer, and in return he sat beside them, listened to their stories, and watched them starve. Kai did not speak much at first, but he saw everything he saw. The cracked wells, the dry storage pits, the hungry stares. He heard the soft coughs of children, and the way the elders spoke in whispers, afraid of the end. He walked the edge of the village each day, studying the strange piles of old things behind their homes. Metal scraps, broken machines, shattered glass, bent wires, all thrown away and forgotten one night, when the village fires had burned low, and the stars blinked in the cold. Kai stood beside the largest pile of junk and placed his hand on a metal box, covered in rust and alien writing. He turned to the silent houses, and whispered a promise not to them, but to himself. The next morning the villagers found Kai, dragging old parts to an empty hut near the edge of the waste. They watched him with tired eyes. Too weak to ask questions, the elders shook their heads, and one said, "Let the boy play with broken things. It keeps his mind busy and harms no one." But Kai was not playing. He worked from sunrise to nightfall, sorting, shaping, fitting strange pieces together. He built a small table, then lined up rows of broken tools. He cracked open empty power cells, and cleaned each piece. He found tubes that still held a trace of liquid, and wires that sparked when rubbed just right. Lyra, a small alien girl, with green eyes and quiet steps, watched from the doorway. She was thin like a stick, and always carried a blanket around her shoulders. She did not speak at first, just left small things near Kai's feet, a tube of glue, a piece of pipe, a cracked lens. Kai smiled and nodded, and kept working each night. The village fires grew smaller, and the silence heavier, but from the edge of the dump faint clicks and clinks echoed as Kai built something that no one understood. One evening, a loud crack snapped through the air, and sparks flew from the hut. Villagers rushed out, afraid of fire, or worse, but all they saw was a dim glow, pulsing inside, and the boy sitting still in the center, covered in grease and dust, his hands pressed on a box with pipes and wires, and strange blinking lights. He looked up at them, and said, "It is not finished, but it will help." The villagers did not believe him. Not yet. They turned away slowly, and went back to their homes only. Lyra stayed watching, as Kai wiped sweat from his face, and turned back to his machine. Days passed, and the machine grew larger, its shape still unclear. Wires hung from the ceiling, and pipes ran across the floor. Kai moved like he was part of it, sleeping in corners, and waking with new ideas. He drew strange shapes on the walls, and spoke in soft human words that no one understood. The elders warned the others, "He will break something, or waste what little we have," but Lyra defended him. "He is not wasting," she said. "He is trying to save us." Then, one morning, as the sun rose weak and pale over the hills, Kai stood beside his machine, and called out to the villagers. "Come, see," he said. They came slowly, some limping, some carried by others, all with eyes full of doubt. The machine looked strange, like a beast made from broken bones and copper veins. Kai reached out and pressed a button, and for a moment nothing happened. Then a soft hum filled the air, a glow rose from the base of the machine, and a pipe shook gently. A few drops of thick liquid poured into a metal bowl. Lyra stepped forward, her hands shaking. She picked up the bowl, sniffed it, tasted it, and gasped, her eyes wide with tears. "It tastes like roots and warm soup," she whispered. The elders stared in silence. One of them asked how. Kai looked at them and said, "I built a recycler from your trash. It pulls water from the air, breaks down waste, and makes food. Not much, but enough to keep going." The silence broke with murmurs and gasps. Some still doubted, but many felt something new deep inside. Not full hope, but the shadow of it. So the boy from the sky who played with broken things became the boy who gave them a reason to rise again tomorrow. The villagers stood around the strange hut, their arms crossed, their eyes narrow with fear and doubt. Some whispered behind their hands, while others simply turned away. The old ones shook their heads slowly, saying the human boy had spent too much time in the sun, that no real help could come from broken things, and glowing wire. Sky did not care about their words. He worked with focus, each day rising with the cold wind and falling asleep with his hands black from ash and oil. He sorted metal plates, polished old parts, rewired melted ends, and carved tiny symbols into the sides of machines. He did not speak much, unless Lyra came by and asked simple questions, and she always did. Lyra became his shadow, curious and quiet, bringing him scraps she found in the ruins of the old depot, and sometimes offering him berries, even though she barely had any herself. Her eyes glowed when she saw something new on the table. When a panel lit up, or a gear spun, she would clap softly and ask how he made it work. I told her that humans learn to survive by fixing things, by turning nothing into something, by believing that even trash could hold secrets. If you looked deep enough, he showed her a broken fan, and then made it spin using wind and wire. He showed her a cracked container, and turned it into a water holder, with a seal made from melted glass. She watched with wonder like the machines were magic, and Kai was their speaker, but the others still laughed at him. One villager threw a stone at the hut, and shouted, "Stop playing with toys. We need food, not lights." Another muttered that Kai had cursed their land with his weird machine, that he was drawing more hunger and sadness by pretending to help. One morning, as fog lay low over the village, Kai brought out a new piece of his project, a round disc made of bent panels and soft wires. It buzzed when touched, and blinked with blue light. He said it could scan the ground for hidden moisture. He placed it gently into the dirt, and waited. Nothing happened. The crowd behind him laughed harder. One yelled, "Look!" The boy found another way to waste time, and the rest chuckled and turned away again. But Lyra stayed, her eyes locked on the blinking disc, her fingers crossed behind her back. Kai sighed and went back inside, knowing he had to make the next part work, or they would never believe him. Again that night, as the cold crept in and the fires burned low, something strange happened. The disc, still buzzing in the dirt, began to glow brighter, and then sent out a soft tone like a bell. Deep underground, something shifted, and a wet patch appeared near the tool. The dirt turned darker, and steam rose from the spot. Lyra saw it first. She ran to the elders and pulled their sleeves, begging them to come see. The ground had changed. The boy had found water in the earth, where they had dug before, and found only dust. The elders came slowly, unsure what to expect when they saw the damp soil. Their eyes widened. One knelt and pressed his hand into it, then lifted his fingers covered in mud. He stared at Kai, who stood silently behind the machine, and asked, "How did you do this?" Kai said, "The disc reads heat patterns and energy. It finds water that sits deep down, and tells me where to dig, and when to stop if we follow its signs. We can make more paste from my other machine, maybe even grow plants one day." The elder said nothing, just stared at his hand, still wet with truth. The next day, more villagers came to watch him work. Not many, and not close, but they watched. Some even asked questions. One gave him a bag of screws, and another left an old solar panel by his door. Small signs of trust. Still one elder, called Torik, did not believe. He said, "This is not real. The boy tricks us with sparks and shadows. He hides things under the ground to fool us. We must stop him before more harm comes." He came to hut that night with a group of strong men, their hands ready to tear down what they did not understand. But Lyra stood in front of the door, her arms wide, her feet firm. She said, "He is not our enemy. He is the only one who is trying to save us. You say he hides things, but he hides nothing. He works in front of us all, with no sleep and no foot." Torik hesitated. His eyes met Kai's through the open window, and saw no fear, only calm and oil-streaked hands holding wires like strings of music. That night they left without touching a single tool. Kai sat on the floor and whispered to Lyra, "I cannot stop now, even if they tear it all down. I will build again. I have seen what is possible, and I know we are close." Lyra nodded and handed him a fresh coil of wire, her eyes bright like stars behind storm clouds. In the morning the machine hummed louder, and the disc blinked faster, and the wind that blew across the junkyard carried not just dust, but the faint scent of coming change. The sky was a dull silver when Kai stepped outside his small hut, carrying a strange piece of metal. It looked like a half-melted helmet, with wires pouring from its sides, and a glass lens in the center. Like an eye, he placed it on top of his growing machine and tapped the side gently, then took a deep breath and whispered, "Please work this time." Lyra watched from behind a broken post, her fingers clutching a scrap of cloth she had found in the ruins. She had not spoken since the night the villagers nearly tore everything down, but now her eyes followed Kai with quiet hope. She had seen the disc find water, and she had tasted the paste from the strange pipes. She believed the machine stood taller now, with pipes stacked like a skeleton's ribs, and blinking lights scattered like stars across its face. The base was made from bent panels and heat coils, while the center pulsed softly like a sleeping heart. Kai had spent nights adjusting its core, using pieces from an old mining drone and a cracked thermal reader. He had one chance to make it run. The villagers gathered again. Some called him brave, others still thought him foolish, but all came because the smell of food still haunted their dreams, and they remembered the tiny spoonfuls of warm paste that had filled their mouths just days before. Kai took a long cord from the machine and jammed it into a glowing socket, then stepped back slowly. The machine let out a low groan, then clicked once, then twice, then silence for a moment. Nothing moved, the wind stopped the sky, held its breath, even the children did not whisper then. A sudden burst of steam shot from the side, followed by a high-pitched whine. The pipes trembled, and the top lens flickered with blue light. A hiss rose from the center as a pipe lowered toward a bowl, sitting empty on a stone slab. Thick gray paste poured slowly into the bowl, smooth and warm and shining in the pail. Light Lyra stepped forward, her small hand shaking. She reached out and dipped her fingers into the bowl, then brought it to her lips. Her face froze, her eyes blinked, and tears filled the corners. She turned to the others and said, "It tastes real. It tastes like food, not like dust, not like root water. Real food." Gasps filled the crowd. One elder stepped forward and tasted the paste. His mouth trembled, and he sat down hard on the ground. He said nothing, but his eyes stared at Kai. Like he was no longer a boy, but something more. Kai said, "The machine pulls moisture from the air, breaks down waste, filters it, and rebuilds it into nutrients. It uses power from the old solar panels, and heat from the coils below. It is not perfect, but it is enough." The villagers pressed closer now, more curious than afraid. One asked if it could make more. Another asked if it could feed the whole village. Kai said, "It can make enough for now, but with help I can build more. I can teach you how to repair it. I just need more tools, and more hands." Storik, the one who once tried to destroy the machine, said loudly, "What if it fails? What if it poisons us, or breaks, and we depend on it, and then die?" Kai looked at him and replied, "Better to try and fall, than wait and die slowly." In silence, that night the village ate paste from the bowl. Not much, but enough to make the hunger fade, enough to make the fire feel warmer, and the stars seem brighter. Mothers smiled for the first time in weeks. Fathers spoke softly instead of in harsh tones, and the children laughed weakly, but it was still laughter. Kai did not rest. He stayed near the machine, cleaning it, checking wires, adjusting the flow. He took notes in a small pad made from scrap paper and charcoal lines. He wrote down what worked and what failed. He thought of new designs, stronger, better, faster, and drew them beside the old ones. Lyra brought him water and cleaned the tools. She said nothing, but stayed close, her eyes wide with quiet pride. The next day, Kai tried to upgrade the heating coils. He used copper lines from a broken cum dish and reshaped them around the intake, but something sparked too early, and the heat surged too fast. A burst of steam blew the side panel open and knocked Kai to the ground. Lyra screamed and ran to him, while the villagers gasped and backed away. Smoke poured from the machine, and the paste inside boiled over, hissing like a living thing. Kai groaned and sat up. His arms burned, but not broken. His hands blackened, but still steady. He smiled weakly, and said, "It almost worked. I just need to fix the seal and slow the heat." The villagers helped him up. This time they brought water to cool the pipes, and hands to lift the panel. Even Torik handed him a tool. Without a word, something had changed. Not just in the machine, but in the hearts around it. They still feared, but now that fear sat beside a small fire of belief. As the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the dust, the machine sat steaming but whole, its heart still beating, its light still glowing, and Kai sat beside it, drawing new plans. In the dirt, dreaming of the next part of the miracle. Dust danced in the warm wind as the sun rose slowly over the hills. The village stirred with soft movements and low voices, but something had changed. The air no longer felt thick with silence. It now carried the sound of hope, the sound of the machine still humming near the edge of the junkyard. Kai stood beside it, covered in grease and dust, his fingers moving carefully over a new control panel. He had rebuilt the broken section with parts from an old heating coil, and wrapped the joints in melted tubing. It was not perfect, but it worked, and the machine lived again, stronger than before. Lyra brought him a small bundle of wires she had found hidden under a cracked storage bin. Her smile was wide and full of pride as she handed it over. Kai took it gently and nodded his thanks without words. Villagers began to arrive in small groups, drawn by the quiet promise of food and warmth. They lined up near the machine, some holding empty bowls, others just watching with cautious eyes. The first drops of nutrient paste spilled into a waiting container, and the smell was stronger than before, richer, like cooked roots and boiled grains. Children reached out with shaking hands, and mothers pulled them close, their hearts full of wonder and fear. At once, when the first taste touched their tongues, they looked up with wide eyes, and tears flowed freely down dry cheeks. One elder stepped forward and asked how long it would last. Kai replied that it would keep working as long as they kept it clean and gave it light and care like a living thing. It needed watching and hands to hold it steady. More villagers offered to help now. They brought old tools and scrap parts. They cleaned the machine with wet cloth and learned the names Kai gave to each part: the intake, the filter, the coil, the mixer. Lyra taught them how to connect wires and check pressure valves using simple steps. Kai had shown her Zune a second unit was being built beside the first, smaller, but made from stronger parts. Torek, who once doubted the boy, now helped carry metal plates and dig support holes. He said little, but his eyes watched every move Kai made with quiet respect. The village began to change. The fires grew brighter at night, and the voices' louder laughter returned, like a song long forgotten, and the wind seemed to carry it across the dust plains, where once only silence lived. Kai sat one night beside the second machine, sketching a new idea on a broken slate. He wanted to add a water recycler, something that could clean the dirty stream at the edge of the village. Lyra watched with wide eyes, asking if it could bring back the green. Kai nodded and said, "Maybe if we try hard enough, but not." All was calm in the hills beyond the village. Eyes watched from the shadows, dark shapes that moved like smoke through the broken rocks. They had seen the lights and heard the stories travelers had whispered of a human boy building life from garbage, and some wanted that power for themselves. One evening, as the sky turned orange with the setting sun, Kai stood on the roof of the hut, watching the horizon. He saw a flicker of motion, far off, too quick to be wind. He narrowed his eyes and marked the direction in his mind. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. He told the elders to prepare, just in case. He asked for guards near the machines and made sure both units had shields made from scrap metal and wire mesh. The villagers listened. Now, not with doubt, but with trust. That night Kai worked late, adding a pressure lock to the main unit. Lyra stayed by his side, handing tools and tightening bolts. Her fingers steady, her face focused. They moved like one team, bound by purpose. The second machine came to life just before dawn. Its first output was stronger than the first, richer, thicker, and more filling. The villagers cheered and clapped their bowls on the ground in thanks. Some began singing an old song of rain and light and growth. Kai stood back and watched. With a soft smile, he had given them a future made from trash and time and belief, and they had given him something, to a place to belong. But as the cheers echoed across the valley, a shadow moved again, near the hills, closer. This time watching, waiting, ready to test the strength of the boy and the hope he had built from dust. Smoke rose on the far edge of the horizon as the wind changed direction, bringing with it a strange bitter scent that made the villagers freeze in place. Their joy from the second machine faded like fog under sunlight. Their eyes turned toward the hills where the sky glowed faintly. Red. Kai stood at the top of the watchtower, a shaky platform made from scrap wood and bent steel. He held a pair of old binoculars that Lyra had fixed with glue and thread. He scanned the hills slowly and carefully, then stopped. His hand tightened around the frame. His voice came low and calm. "They are coming." Dark shape moved across the ridge, long and low, like a shadow made solid. It was not a wild animal, and not a trader caravan. It moved too fast and too smooth. It had engines hidden under black panels, and a single glowing eye at the front, a raider ship, and it was heading straight for the village. The villagers gathered in the center, clutching their children and food bowls, their fear louder than their voices. Some remembered the last time raiders came, when the fields were burned and tools stolen, and homes shattered under metal boots. Kai jumped down and ran to the machine. He unplugged the main cable and began rewiring the control board, his hands moving faster than ever before. He called for Torek and Lyra to bring the backup coil and the storage cells from the hut. They ran without question, and others followed, bringing wire and metal panels, and anything that could help. "We need to hide the second machine," he said quickly. "It is too new, too fragile. They cannot get it, or they will take everything from you." Torek ordered the younger ones to carry it to the dry well and cover it with blankets and dust, while Kai rigged the first unit with a trap, not a weapon but a surprise. He used the power cord to overload the heat coils and wired them to burst if someone tampered with the panel. He wrapped the warning light in cloth to hide the glow. The sun dipped lower, and the red in the sky grew deeper until the clouds themselves looked like burning ash. The raider ship slowed near the edge of the hills, then hovered above the ground, silent and menacing, with its glowing eye fixed on the village. From the belly of the ship came 6 figures tall and wrapped in armor made from bone and steel, their faces hidden behind black masks. Their hands held spears made from old tech and shock coils. They walked in silence until they reached the center of the village. Then of them stepped forward, his voice thick and cold. "We heard of a human boy who makes food from trash. We want what he built. Give it to us, or we burn this place to the ground." Kai stepped forward alone. He stood small and thin before the armored giants, but his eyes were steady, and his voice clear. "The machine is broken. It gave out yesterday, and we are fixing it now. You can take parts, but they will not help you without the core." The leader tilted his head, then stepped closer and shoved Kai hard to the ground. He turned and nodded to his men. "Tear it apart," he said. "If it works, we keep it. If not, we take the core and the boy." Lyra screamed and ran toward Kai, but Torek grabbed her arm and held her back. The villagers stood frozen, unsure if they should fight or run or kneel. The raiders approached the machine and began pulling at the panels. The wires snapped, the gears bent, the front casing fell to the ground, revealing the glowing heart of the recycler, and just as the leader reached for it, the trap triggered. A loud hiss burst from the base, followed by a wave of heat and light. The coils surged with stored energy, and the panel exploded in a flash of fire and smoke, knocking the raiders back onto the ground. One screamed as his arm caught fire, and the others scrambled to retreat. Kai stood slowly, wiping blood from his lip, and pointed at the smoking remains of the machine leave. Now, he shouted, or we show you what else we can make from trash. The leader snarled and raised his weapon, but the ship above blinked twice, then hovered lower. A voice came from the speakers, cold and sharp. Leave them, it said, not worth the cost. We find easier prey. The raiders pulled their injured back into the ship and vanished into the sky like smoke carried by the wind, leaving behind silence and ash. The villagers gathered around Kai as the fire died down and the wreck of the first machine cooled to black. He looked at them with tired eyes and said, "We still have the second one hidden, and I can build another. It will take time, but we will not stop." "Not now." Torek stepped forward and placed a hand on Kai's shoulder, then turned to the others and said, "He is not just a boy, he is the shield we never had, and the builder we always needed." That night, they sat in circles around small fires, eating what little paste remained, sharing quiet stories under the red sky that slowly turned black. Again, above them, ash floated through the morning sky as the villagers gathered around the ruins of the first machine, the metal frame still warm from the trap that had saved them. Steam hissed softly from broken vents, and the smell of burnt wire filled the air, but no one cried, and no one looked away, because they knew this machine had bought them time and had bought them safety. Kai sat quietly near the wreckage, his arms wrapped in cloth, and his fingers still black from the fire. Lyra knelt beside him, her small hands holding a cracked water flask. She pressed it to his lips, and he drank slowly, the taste of warmth and dust mixed with the ache in his bones, but he said nothing. He just nodded and looked toward the dry well where the second machine waited. Torek stood near the edge of the group, his eyes scanning the hills for any sign of return, but the sky was empty and silent. Only wind moved now, whispering through the broken huts and over the dry ground, carrying away the last smoke from the battle. "We have the second machine," Kai said softly. "It is safe and it still works, but it is not enough for all of us. Not yet. We must rebuild. We must make more." The villagers listened in silence, their faces thin and tired, but filled with a new kind of fire, a fire that did not come from anger or fear, but from belief. Stood and pointed to the old warehouse on the edge of the village. It was half collapsed and filled with rust and dust, but it had walls and space and shadow. "We can build there," she said. "We can make it a workshop." Kai nodded and tried to stand, but his legs shook and he fell to one knee. Torek moved without speaking and lifted him up, then carried him toward the hut, where Lyra had already spread a soft cloth and placed clean tools and a fresh coil of wire. While Kai rested, the villagers moved like never before. They cleared the warehouse, they carried broken machines from forgotten corners, they sorted scrap and cleaned parts, and even the smallest children helped gathering wires and bolts and glass pieces. The second machine was moved, with care, hidden under layers of cloth, and guarded by two elders with long poles sharpened at the ends. They placed it in the heart of the new workshop and powered it up under the weak light of the sun. It hummed to life with no trouble. The paste it made was thicker now, richer, as if the machine had learned from the first one. The villagers tasted it and smiled, some even laughed softly for the first time. In Moonsky watched from the doorway, wrapped in blankets, with his face pale and hands shaking, but his mind still sharp. He drew new designs on the floor using sticks and ash. He planned a third unit, smaller and mobile, able to move from house to house, bringing food where it was needed most. But the damage to his body ran deep. The heat from the explosion had left burns across his arms and legs, and his voice had grown weak. Even so, he refused to stop. He whispered instructions to Lyra, and she passed them on. She learned to read his sketches and build from them with hands that moved like they had always known how. One night, as the stars blinked overhead and the fires burned low, Lyra came to Kai and held his hand. He looked at her and saw tears in her eyes, not from fear, but from something else, something heavy. "You gave us life," she said. "You gave us something no one ever gave before, not just food, but a future, and I do not want to lose you." Kai smiled weakly and squeezed her hand. "I am not going anywhere," he said. "I have too much work to finish." But even as he spoke, his body grew colder and his breath slower. He closed his eyes that night, with the sound of the machine humming softly in the distance, and Lyra holding his hand as if it was the only thing keeping him in this world. In the morning, he did not wake. The village stood still. No words were spoken as they carried him to the high ridge and laid him in the earth above the machines he built. Lyra placed a small gear in his hand and whispered a promise that they would keep building, and they would never spoke for the village, his voice strong and steady. He came from the stars, with nothing but broken things, and built a miracle. He was not just a human boy, he was our spark that night. The second machine worked without pause, feeding the people, giving them strength, and in the shadows of the workshop, a third unit began to take shape, its pieces guided by the hands of those he had taught. The wind moved gently over the hill where Kai rested his grave, marked by a stone carved with symbols of light, and gears and stars. The villagers came each morning, and left small pieces of wire or metal or drawings made by children, as gifts for the one who had changed their fate below the hill. The village no longer looked the same. The broken huts had been repaired with metal plates and glowing panels. The once dry fields now held rows of green shoots rising from the dirt like quiet soldiers. The air smelled of warm paste and growing things, and the sound of machines filled the air, like music. The second unit still worked at the center of the village, its pipes humming and its heart glowing. It fed the people each day, and never failed. Its light a reminder that hope could live, even in the dust. Beside it now stood a third unit, smaller and faster, mounted on wheels and guided by young hands who had learned from Kai himself. Lara walked beside the mobile unit, each day her hands steady, and her voice calm. She taught others how to fix the filters and clean the lines. She had grown taller, her eyes sharper, but her heart still carried the soft voice of the boy who had come from the stars. She wore a small gear around her neck, the one she had placed in his hand. Torik had taken charge of the building teams, now his doubt long gone, replaced by a quiet respect for the lessons Kai had left behind. He often stood beside the machines, and spoke to the young ones about the time before, when fear had ruled them, and how a single act of courage had broken the silence. The workshop had become the heart of the village, its walls covered in sketches and notes and half-built devices. Many of them were Kai's original ideas, others were new, born from the minds of children who believed that trash was not useless, that every broken thing could be shaped into something better. One of the machines collected rain from the sky and stored it in clean barrels. Another used wind to turn gears and pump fresh water from deep wells. They had even built small lights that lined the paths between homes, glowing blue and soft in the night. Visitors came from distant places, drawn by stories of the human boy and his miracle machines. Some brought gifts, others brought questions, all left with something new in their eyes. A spark that had not been there before. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with gold and red, Lyra climbed the hill and sat beside the stone. She spoke aloud, not with sadness, but with pride. She told Kai about the new machines, about the visitors and the green fields and the children who now learned how to build instead of just survive. She said they had started planting fruit seeds in the backfield using nutrient paste as soil, and how the first flower had bloomed that morning. She said they had named the new garden after him, Kai's hope, and placed a light in the center that never went dark. She said thank you, not just for the machines, but for the belief he had given them, and for showing them that even the smallest hand could shape the future. Wind answered with a soft breath, moving over the tall grass and stirring the pages of a small book placed beside the stone, a book of drawings and notes and ideas left unfinished, waiting for others to complete. The next day, a group of children gathered at the workshop led by Lyra, each one holding a small broken item, a gear, a plate, a wire. They sat in a circle and began to build, not because they were told, but because they wanted to, because they believed. As the sun rose higher and the machines hummed louder, the village moved with purpose, not just to survive, but to grow, to learn, to dream, the way Kai had taught them. And far beyond the hills where the sky met the stars, the story of the human boy who built a miracle from junk and saved an alien village from starving lived on, not just in words, but in every light that glowed in the dark, and every gear that turned with hope. The boy who came from nowhere had given them everything, not with weapons, not with power, but with hands covered in dust and a heart full of fire, and now they carried that fire forward. One piece of scrap at a time, one dream at a time, one life at a time.